Joining us now on 710 KURV, we want to continue the conversation about the border crisis, the wave of the illegal immigrant children. And we want to talk with the Heritage Foundation. We talked with them, I think, last week. We talked about policy. And we want to continue right now. Joining us on 710 KURV is Genevieve Wood. She is, your title is super duper long. What is it, Genevieve?
Well, I'm the senior contributor for the Daily Signal. The Daily Signal is the brand new, we're about 3 weeks old, multimedia news source from Heritage.
Wow, sounds good. Now, I just read this piece on USA Today, and it says the politics of border security hamper immigration overhaul. Can you explain what's going on and why we're not seeing any change?
Sure. Well, I think, look, there's kind of two sides to this argument. There are those in Washington and other parts of the country that think the right answer to immigration is to give amnesty for many of the illegal immigrants that are currently living in the country. And there are others who say, no, actually what we need to do first is secure our border, make sure that we know who's coming and going, and that we actually are either keeping people out or allowing people in, that we're in control of them before we address these other issues. And I think that we've been told from folks in Washington that our border is secure, but I
Yeah.
think what we've seen very recently in South Texas, right where you all are, is that it's not secure and that people are able to come across. And frankly, most of them are not being sent home. And so why, and I firmly believe that a lot of that's because they've heard talk of amnesty. They've heard that if they come in, they can stay. And that's why people are flooding in right now.
You mentioned that everything was secure, and it was, I think, my very first bit when I started working here at 710 KURV not too long ago. Janet Napolitano, of course, handpicked by the president, and she's not that stupid. She works at University of California. She's the president, so she can't be dumb at all. She's not ignorant. But she said that this area is the most secure area in the United States of America. It's referring to the border. What happens from being the most secure to now being a humanitarian crisis? With Henry Quay, our congressman, said this is also a national crisis. How do you go from that to here, or then to now?
Well, sure. Well, you make policy decisions, and which I believe this administration has done, that are not helpful in securing the border. Look, you can't talk about amnesty. You can't do what the president has done, which back just 2 years ago came out and said we're going to delay deportation for a lot of minors. Basically, he's decided what parts of immigration laws he wants to enforce, which ones he doesn't. We're deporting fewer people from the interior of the country than we ever have since 1973. So if you do those kinds of things, you tell people who want to come here, who live in other places, hey, if you come on now and get in now, there's a good chance you're going to be able to stay. We're not going to enforce our immigration laws. And so, look, we all think America's a pretty good country. I understand why people want to come here. I don't blame them for wanting to come here. But we have to understand that we have to secure our borders. We can't just let people flood in, and that's what you're seeing right now.
This is not anything new. I think every campaign or every presidential campaign since I've been alive, which hasn't been that many, they always mention secure borders. They always mention this immigration reform. How come it's taking so dang long for something solid to actually happen? We're seeing things progress, I think, or I would say I'll change that. I think we're seeing things degress when it comes to the secure borders. We're seeing things degress when it comes to the economy in other countries, and the violence and everything else of that nature is increasingly worse. Why is it taking so long for something to happen when we can all see a very simple trip down to the valley? You can see the floods of mess coming this
That's
way.
right. Well, and I think something that, many people are focused, especially nationally, on all these folks coming across right now, the fact that many are children and the humanitarian side of it, and there's no doubt that that's an issue. But the border folks that I talked to when I was there this past weekend, the members of the Texas Department of Public Safety, said what other people need to focus on is this is creating gaps in our border for the drug cartels and others to exploit because we're so focused on this other side of it. So there's all that going on as well that I think isn't getting, frankly, the kind of coverage that it should. But to your exact point on why is it taking so long, look, I think there are a lot of people in Washington on both sides of the aisle who would like to see various forms of immigration reform take place. The problem is the president really has not been good at his word in dealing with things. I mean, if you come forward and say, well, yeah, we want to secure the border first, but the president comes along and says, well, I'm only going to do this part of it, just does executive action as opposed to following the law, it creates a real mistrust with lawmakers that no matter what they pass, he's going to enforce it or not enforce the parts that he does or does not like. Well, that just doesn't create an atmosphere where you're going to get good legislation.
We've seen the numbers. You've seen the numbers the same as I have. We've been to all the press conferences, I'm assuming together. And you're seeing the numbers just increase, increase. We've had the borders reinforced multiple times. What does a secure border look like? Since everybody keeps touting, like Janet Napolitano, saying
Yeah.
that the borders are most secure. You're seeing all these different. What does a secure border
What
look
does it
like?
mean?
Yeah, what does it
Right.
mean?
Well, I mean, look, there's some people think, we should build more walls and this sort of thing. But the reality is a secure border is where you have enough law enforcement that you can apprehend the majority of people coming across. There will always be somebody who sneaks through. But you've got to have, you've got to be able to say the majority of folks we are actually apprehending. And when we apprehend them, we make sure that we send them home. I mean, if they're coming across illegally. And it's that second part, frankly, that's really the hard part that I think is not happening. I mean, the folks I talked to in McAllen said, look, we're doing our part of apprehending people. We're processing them. Unfortunately, they're in these because there's so many, they're in these holding facilities that were never meant to house 800, 1,000 people. But the Border Patrol and the Texas Department of Public Safety are doing their job. They're stopping people. They're processing them, seeing if they have a criminal record, finding out where they're from. It is in the responsibility of the federal government to then take those folks and begin the deportation process and send them home. It's that second part that is not happening near as fast as it should, and in many cases, it's not happening at all.
Yeah, this is Davis Rankin, and thank you for being with us, Ms. Wood. Do you know, this is kind of an arcane thing to ask, but do you know what the history of the government has been? Let me back up. Unaccompanied minors, after a law passed in the early 2000s, as I recall, said that have to be turned over to Health and Human Services for their care.
That's right.
And
that's right.
One source we've had on the radio says that unaccompanied minors then are joined with family members who are here or given to somebody, but that they're not deported. They're here not lawfully, and then they are not deported. Do you know what the history of what the record is on this? I'm trying to find out what's really true as opposed to what people say is true.
Right. Well, I don't have exact numbers in front of me right now, but you're exactly right that unaccompanied minors who come over, once they've been apprehended and then processed, they are supposed to be taken into the custody of HHS, Health and Human Services, by law, and they are supposed to identify a family member in the United States that they say they have come to live with or that they can identify. And that's happening now much slower. The HHS wasn't prepared for this flood, even though I think they probably should have known it was coming. So instead of taking those children immediately, a lot of these kids are still in these facilities in South Texas, not being taken into HHS as quickly as they should. But secondly, they then are oftentimes matched with family members here, parents, who are they themselves here illegally. And as opposed to then reuniting them and saying, okay, now we've reunited the family and we're going to send everyone back home to your country of origin, they're letting everybody stay. I mean, and they may be told, okay, we're matching you with your family in Baltimore or in Dallas or wherever it happens to be, and told that at that point you have 3 days to report to the local immigration office and they'll begin the deportation hearing and process. Well, we know the majority of those folks never report to the local immigration authority.
We know.
So they just
do we have records of who they're matched with? In other words, if we know where we drop them off,
right,
whether that person's here lawfully or not, we know there should be a record of where they were last the last contact with Border Patrol. And then you go look at that address and see if they're still there.
Well, you could do that, but that requires authorities to go do that. It requires agents to actually go follow up on that. And so that's not happening. And so that's, we drop them off and basically people are just then let go into society.
Ms. Wood, we have to bounce, as we say down here on the border, but thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much for yours as well, and thank you for the focus you all are putting on this issue.
Thank you very much. Genevieve Wood is a senior contributor to the Daily Signal, which is a publication of the Heritage Foundation. You're listening to 710 KURV.